name is Usha Kelly Maharaj. I know it's a long name. I'm the ACL of Science at York Memorial Collegiate in Toronto. I describe myself as just a regular teacher stumbling towards excellence by self-training in scientific research and personal experimentation. It's a mishmash. I've been teaching for 21 years, and so that's a long time to experiment and to research and to put it into practice. And I really do enjoy this field of work. So today we're talking about culturally responsive pedagogy, and culturally responsive pedagogy is a pedagogical stance that claims to be able to eliminate and mitigate barriers to success based on discriminatory practices, and that the goal is to eliminate achievement gaps associated with status, socioeconomic status, which sounds very appealing. If there's a pedagogical process that could do that, I think we would all be on board. And so there's been a lot of talk about this, but in this, especially when we go to workshops, I find that they're often geared towards literacy, maybe the humanities, sometimes even math, but science is not usually addressed very effectively, I found. So I'm very excited to be doing a workshop on that today. And I'm hoping that we can have a great discussion on it. I don't know how many people feel that they have any experience with this type of pedagogy. And so we're going to just take a pulse check to start us off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to check first. Leila, how many people do we have on our group?
We have 5 attendees.
Are they able to just talk? Because since it's just a small number, rather than use a Jamboard, maybe we can just talk, or is that something we can?
I'm not really sure.
Or I can use the comments. I just feel with a small number, we could just do it that way.
Why don't you drop it in the chat and let's just do the Jamboard.
Okay, so we'll just do it in the chat then. So instead of using a Jamboard, could you just tell me anything that you know about culturally responsive pedagogy? And it's fine if you say, look, I've heard the term, I don't know much about it. Or if you do, what do you think you know about it? Any ideas of what we'll be talking about when we say culturally responsive pedagogy?
Did you want to, can we do the Jamboard and maybe they'll respond more?
I will do the Jamboard. So
You can just drop it in the chat there.
Yeah. There you go. So you should have access to the Jamboard. There we go. I see Leila on.
It's on view only.
On view only. So I will need to check the settings on that. Share. Change. Anyone on the internet? Oh, can edit. There we go. Yeah, that should, you might have to refresh the screen.
Got it. Okay, so you wanted to answer this question, what is CRP, or what you said before?
Any ideas you have?
How familiar are we with it?
Yeah, and if you have any comments about it, your ideas about it, opinions, that's fine too. I'm going to put the link again.
Okay, so Teresa says she doesn't see the link. Kelsey says it's been a priority in my board for the past few months. We have had quite a bit of PD on it, and I'm currently taking the ELL AQ, which discusses it a bit.
Wonderful. Okay, so that's great. Kelsey, maybe you could tell us a bit of, since you've had professional development, from your understanding of what they're telling you at your board, what do you think that CRP is all about? What is your understanding of it thus far? Any ideas? Like, what were your workshops telling you this pedagogy is about?
They can't see the link, so I'm just pasting it in again to everyone.
Or maybe they can't see my comments. That's what it is. I think, Leila,
I just changed it, so I address it to everybody, so maybe they can see the link now. Okay, I see people appearing on the Jamboard now.
So it's about making and building an environment where students feel able to feel welcomed and supported. Okay. Keeping in mind that multiple perspectives and various cultures should be represented in our classroom. Layla's put on something that includes everyone. So there seems to be a common thread in the comments so far about inclusion and belonging, that students should feel included and belonging in the classroom.
Okay, I see another sticky note. Well, multiculturalism is important. CRP is a pedagogy that's closer to social justice.
So there's a concept of social justice embedded in that belonging, yes. Okay. So we've got representation, inclusion, and social justice all coming together. All right, I think that's an excellent start. If anybody else wants to pop on comments, we'll take a look at it when I come back to the board. Taking a stance on education which supports anti-oppression and tries to break apart colonial systems which have created an education system we have today. That's a heavy one. Inclusion, multiple perspectives to ensure that students see themselves represented in education. Inclusion of community partners to support this, yeah. So very heavy emphasis on inclusion, belonging, representation, and social justice. Yeah, and there seems to be a couple comments that it's a priority for many boards. Okay, wonderful. All right, so we're gonna go back to Jamboard from time to time, and so we're going to break down culturally responsive pedagogy as having 4 key characteristics or strategies embedded in it. And the first one is excellence, which I have to say has been, it sounds very simple, but I would like to take a look at the word excellence, because I have to say that I have never heard a teacher who said, I'm lowering standards. I've never heard a politician say we're lowering standards when it comes to education. Everyone always says that they're raising the standards, they're promoting excellence in their program. And yet we have a huge problem sometimes about trying to understand what are we talking about and how do we achieve that. So even I struggle with it sometimes. I remember the first time I was asked about how I felt that I was decreasing the education gap in my class, what it was I was doing. I said, well, one of the things is we raised the standards, and very rightfully, my VP said, what do you even mean by that? And how do you just raise the standard? Do you just say, well, I don't want anyone to score less than X, and therefore I've done something well? So it took a while for me to break this down. What are we really talking about? Can I show what it is I'm doing? And to me, my analysis came to we're dealing with shifting away from concepts as our focus and towards skills as our focus, and which makes sense because in many ways, what the concept is that I'm teaching in my classroom can change, but the skill set never changes. And that's what I really want to bring out, that it's not about rote memorization. It's not about dealing with concepts that maybe tomorrow may be less important concepts. It's the skills that will travel through with the students. And there are 4 major catchments of skills, even though they overlap, that you can cluster your skills into. So the first and one is literacy. This is the ability to communicate and get information from various forms of text, written text, visual text, media text, oral text, and to be able to understand these texts and give back, communicate yourself in these texts. The second group, of course, is going to be numeracy, the ability to analyze data, to interpret statistics, to work with measurements, fractions, etc. And these things we use a lot in science. Then we have, of course, my favorite, being a science teacher, the inquiry skills, the ability to make a question, to plan how to investigate it, to initiate an investigation, to analyze, to perform an inquiry, and then to communicate it back. So that brings back into literacy. And then, of course, what a lot of boards are pushing now is the global competency skills, the ability to critically think, problem solve, manage information, creativity, communication, etc. All of these skills will be in all of my courses, regardless of what the content is. Even if the contents change next year, they change the curriculum for grade 9, I would still be carrying this skill set with my students. And so whatever I do in my classroom, my content, my curriculum content is really a vehicle to get at these skills, is what I'm going to be doing. My focus is on making sure that these skills are addressed first and foremost. The next thing is to build what we call cultural competency. It's the ability for us to work with each other in a community, to understand each other, to respect each other, to understand the difference between my intent and my impact. And that when my intent and my impact are not aligned with each other, the ability to take responsibility for that, the ability to mitigate any consequences that come up with that, to be able to restore a relationship with somebody when that happens, that is an essential set of skills that needs to be in any community. And so we're going to build that ability to empathize with each other and function with each other in a society. We're going to have something called a critical cultural consciousness, which is we are going to try to make sure that we understand that when we are looking at a person and we're trying to empathize with them, that we understand that the experiences and the perspective that people have are going to be impacted by a variety of factors. So we're going to have a little bit of fun with this. I'm going to see if this works. I have never used this software before. I was playing with it and I thought, you know what, I like it. Let's see what it does. So I'm going to put it on the screen. Hopefully you can see it. It's just a text collage generator from the internet. And I'm going to ask you if you could put into the comments, can you put some words in for me, just single words, of what sorts of factors in a person's life can be impacting their experiences and their perspective? What is it that is shaping us as people? And you can type the comments and I'll just put the words in as you put them in. If some of them are similar, I might not put it because I'm typing very quickly. So I'll go for any that are different from the others.
What was the
I'm going to
question?
put whatever anybody puts, whether I agree with it or disagree with it, okay?
Sorry, what was the question again?
So what are some
Words.
factors that affect our experiences as individuals and our perspectives that we would have?
Mhm.
Okay. All right, I'm gonna just visualize it for us. So you can, it's just a quick demo of a neat little thing you can use in your classroom. It's nice for getting kids to practice their vocabulary in science classes, and it's fun. So you put your list of words in, you select an image for it, and I'll just do a heart because it's easy, and I tell it to visualize. And it makes a text collage. It's kind of neat, so the kids would just first collect the important part is they've collected their vocabulary, they probably discuss some of the terms, then they generate their picture. So it adds a little bit of fun to the vocabulary process. All right, so as a lot of you are expressing who I am and who you are as a person, there are a lot of factors within your family, within your community, and outside of that, in the external environment that are impacting you and is shaping what you think, how you feel, what your experience are. History, politics, systemic barriers in your society, socioeconomic issues, the media, etc. These are all impacting how a person views themselves, how they react to the circumstances around them, because each person in their society has a different experience. Two Canadians do not have the same experience in this country, and critical cultural consciousness tries to bring us to understand how there are issues outside of us that are playing into us, and that these issues may be long-stemming issues from historical experiences, political experiences, etc. It's trying to look at how these socioeconomic factors are impacting on the person. I'm going to put this bigger. There we go. And finally, and then this thing, I think this one we are really nailing down. I think this is the one that everyone is really getting an idea of what with CRP is that it's that piece about belonging. And in order to generate that belonging in the classroom, generally speaking, the research is suggesting we want three things to be there. There's the element of inclusion, that the participation on each of every student matters in the classroom. There needs to be diversity needs to be embraced so that multiple perspectives are actually wanted in my classroom. I want to hear different opinions and ideas and ways of doing things, etc. And finally, there's a piece of equity, that your program is accessible to your students. So if you're running a program that embraces your students, encourages their participation, encourages them to have their voice on the table, and that it's and that we want a diversity of views and ways of doing things, and that you're making sure that whatever program you run, that it is accessible to all of your students, you're going to create that community of belonging for them. And that doesn't mean that they belong because they conform to anyone in your classroom. We're going to have very diverse ideas, and we're going to have to encourage kids to figure out for themselves what it is that they feel they are as a person. What is their sense of identity? We don't make their identity for them. And the identity of a person evolves over time, and we are going to allow them to explore that as we go on in our program with them. And that means letting them bring their opinions to the table. Three things that we are always encouraged to avoid when we do CRP, though, is simply doing cultural celebration. Cultural celebration, you can celebrate cultures for fun, but that is not culturally responsive pedagogy. That might be community building, but it's not connected to your curriculum. We don't want token representation, and we don't want simplistic identity labels. You can't decide that you can reach students of a particular demographic group by bringing in what you think is their culture, because everybody has a very personal idea of what their culture is. And we have many identities, that whole intersectionality coming at us. So a few things to be aware of and to avoid. If you're running a program that is distant, whatever you do, if you think it's CRP, but it has no connection to your curriculum, you're probably not running CRP. Whatever you do should be connected to your curriculum. You also need to make sure that whatever you're doing, you be willing to run that in your classroom, whether you have a certain demographic group there or not. If you're going to do something because you want to reach, female students or Black students or Indigenous students, and you're like, if I didn't have those students in my classroom, I wouldn't do this, that's probably not CRP then. You don't want to define for students what it means to put any identity label in either. So if we can avoid these three things, we're probably going to be dealing with CRP and not just tokenism, celebration, or oversimplifying cultures. Okay. So to look at what it means, because it's easy to say what you don't do, and even when we say what we should do, what does this look like in a classroom? So we're going to take a really small activity to get us started. It's not a full lesson. It should take only about 15 minutes in the classroom, and then you would follow it up with more. So you consider it maybe a minds-on activity if you'd like, or a discussion activity. Okay. We're going to go back to the Jamboard. And what we're going to do is on the second page, there's a picture. And I'd like you to sticky note on one or two sticky notes on comments that are either hypotheses, observations, inferences, or questions. So the second page, I'm not going to tell you what the picture is, you're supposed to observe it. So hypotheses, observations, interpretations, or questions. And I'm just going to put the link for the Jamboard just again, just in case we've lost it. Oh, so I want you to write a question then. So if it's a question, what's your question? Oh, where is this? There we go. So questions, hypotheses, observations, or inferences. Where is this? Why did these die? And so there's some observation and interpretation in that. The person has observed the fish and they've interpreted those fish don't look very lively. So the question is, why are they dead? And if you would like to answer that person's question, that will probably be a hypothesis.
All right, I'm back.
So we're just doing on the picture on the Jamboard, we're putting sticky notes on hypotheses, questions, observations, or interpretations. We're very big on the why are the fish dead? And of course, as I point out, this question has, oh, there's a hypothesis. Is this pollution?
Whoops. So we were supposed to do a hypothesis and what?
You can do an observation, interpretation, hypothesis, or question. Oh, a very specific pollution then. Is it mercury poisoning? Is it overcrowding? Oh, we got some good hypotheses going here. All right, so this is the sort of thing we do with the grade 9s often. It's a very good way to build skills on how do you do your observations. If you wish as a teacher, you can also even tell them color coded. I want you to color code your observations a certain color, your interpretations a color, etc., so that you can check, do they know the difference between an observation versus an interpretation? Because those are the two they have the most trouble with. Outcompeting, overcrowding. Excellent. All right. So what we're going to do is go back to the lesson, and we'd let the kids go for it a while, discuss it, etc. So if I go back to the presentation, that picture was taken from an article, and it had a caption underneath the picture. I'm not going to give you the whole caption, but this is a shortened version of it. It says, "Wanton waste after a night of bow fishing."
Oh,
discarded next to the
wow.
boat ramp. So they were caught and thrown out.
It's terrible.
It's terrible. So no poisoning. If they were perfectly healthy fish, they weren't overcrowded. They're just really clustered because as people get out of the boat, they take their picture, they chuck it in the water. So why are they doing this with the fish? There are two types of fish in North America. And in many scientific articles and materials, you will see this. This was actually about scientists reconsidering some terms that we're using. And so the term is game fish or rough fish. And a rough fish in general colloquial terms becomes translated into trash fish. So most fisher people will call rough fish trash fish, and scientists will call them rough fish. The big difference is that game fish are intensely managed and regulated. When you can catch them, where you can catch them, how you can catch them. And you have to have a license to do that, to specific types of fish lines, etc. Rough fish, on the other hand, often can be killed in any way without any restriction or very few restrictions. So you are free to go out and hunt these fish these fish, and then throw them out. And there's a lot of types of fish that fall under this banner. And so, oops, the question that students are asked at this point in time, and we'll see what we can come up with. We're going to go back to the same Jamboard. I'd like you to, oh, we got some more invasive species. Okay, so I think some people are thinking about, I've started thinking about it. Why, if these are rough fish that have been just tossed out, why are they rough fish? I mean, yep, so I'm going to purple page now. Why would they be designated rough fish? If scientists are saying some fish are game fish, some fish are rough fish, what's a rough fish? Why would we have such a thing? What's the criteria for designating a fish a rough fish or trash fish? What are your ideas for why? And I think some of the ideas on the other page can be just translated here. Are they harmful to the environment? Yeah, if a fish is harmful to the environment, some fish are desirable because they make good eating, not a lot of bones. So maybe the fish that aren't so great for eating are the rough fish. The ones that are harmful to the environment, they're the rough fish. They're not valued by us. Maybe it's their population. So if they've got a lot of these fish, you're like, the fish are fine, go ahead, do what you want. And I think somebody on the other page had put something about maybe it's an invasive species, or maybe they're trying to say that was killed by an invasive species. Yeah, maybe they're invasive. These are excellent ideas, okay? And if you had been in charge, as I told students, if they were in charge of deciding if a fish were a rough fish or a trash fish, we might have had fewer problems. Because while that makes sense from a science point of view, those are good ideas for why you might say, we don't really want to worry about managing these, we're putting our emphasis on other fish. That's not really why they've been designated rough fish. This is an old term. It has gone back a long time. The designations were done a long time ago. It wasn't based on science. It was based on, as somebody pointed out, it's the values of humans. But it was done on the historical values of white European males. It was a tool of colonialism, racism, and sexism. It put the hands and control on wildlife based on the values of what certain men were wanting. And it was actually used as a tool of destruction. The best example isn't the fish that makes it obvious what was going on. The best example is this picture. And some of you may have seen this picture. Does anyone know what this picture is about? What is in this picture?
Is it fish? Are they fish?
Those are not fish.
Oh my goodness.
It's an old picture, so it's a bit fuzzy, but if you look carefully, you might figure out what this is. Yes, it's buffalo skulls.
Oh, buffalo.
Fish that are designated rough fish are actually perfectly edible many times, but they weren't on the diet of European men. Salmon, trout, species they knew from Europe were designated as game fish. That's what was important to them. Especially important to remove from the ecosystem was anything that our indigenous populations depended upon. They were starved off their land, in part. It wasn't an accident. We know it's not an accident because all of these things about removing the wildlife. Asian Indian eat a lot of whole fish. The question of bones is last. Yes. We know that because when they did this, they wrote down exactly what they were doing. They said, kill every buffalo because every buffalo you can kill is another Indian god. They said it plain out loud. It was in the instructions on what to do. Remove the wildlife and you will starve out the indigenous population, and you would also make them dependent on the government so they could be controlled. That's why there's rock fish and trash fish. And it's a holdover that scientists are now saying they need to get rid of these terms. The lawn, a lot of people talk about the lawn as they were imitating the aristocrats of Europe, and it's partly true, but the lawn was part of the clearing of the land. You clear the trees, you clear the animals that depend on the trees, etc., and then you will be able to push the indigenous populations out by literally starving them. Yes, I absolutely will share the resources. No worries. So we are now dealing with, my daughter's checking on me for dinner. Yes, I would love that for dinner. I'm being taken care of in the corner there. We're seeing the problem with this because unfortunately, many of these species, while they may not have been important to the European diet, no worries, they are important to the ecosystems. Many of them are keystone species even sometimes. And right now, scientists are screaming the alarm because we're watching a collapse of ecosystems, and especially the freshwater ecosystems, in this case of trash fish. They're collapsing because the trash fish are important fish to the ecosystem. They do a wide diversity of jobs, and they're being killed for no reason except to take a picture and throw them out again. So we will hopefully undo that. And this is the sort of conversation that you can definitely link into your curriculum. I think a lot of people, when they reflect, they're like, I can see how this fits in my grade 9 and my grade 11 courses very readily. So you could take this as a warm-up activity And even if the rest of the class you're doing food chains, etc., and it doesn't feel very connected to what you're doing, yeah, you would then, you're bringing out meaning to what we do. So when I did this lesson, I actually was doing it just before we talked about what are the components of an ecosystems and that whole interactions between the abiotic and biotic factors. And this was our lead into it. But we could have easily done it in a number of other ways. And so since there was resources, I'll get to resources in a second, but I just want to talk about how did I design this lesson? Because it's very, sometimes it's daunting. How do we do this? Like when you see an example, like that's a beautiful example, but how did it actually get designed? And it's actually not hard. I take a central concept is that we're going to take a little bit of a historical perspective and we're going to use something called disproportionate relevance. I'm going to go for the fact that certain things are relevant to all of us, but it might matter more to some than others. So we can take a problem, for example. So this is the risk for diabetes, for the body's mass index, for various socioeconomic, for various demographic groups, sorry. So we can see that move these things around so I can see it. Different demographic groups, if you're white, the same body mass index does not translate into the same level of diabetes risk. If you're South Asian, it is the worst level of risk for the same biomass index. And then we've got Chinese and Blacks are in between. And you can have the students hypothesize, why might that be? Some of it might be genetics, but it's not completely based on genetics. There are socioeconomic factors that are creating it. If we did this, if we broke down the socioeconomic factors, we'd see it's not just genetics. So tackling a problem and breaking it out on how it might be playing into different, how does it impact different demographic groups can help us flush out the inequities and bring in that lens of somebody mentioned before, the social justice piece with it. We can see the same sort of idea when we explore technology. So for grade 12 biology, we were talking about the importance of water, big idea in biology, grade 12. And when we did water, we talked about food preservation, that removing water from the situation is an important method of preserving food. There's many techniques that is the important thing, is take the water out, things can't live in it. So we talked about the evolution of that concept. One of the earliest forms would have been dehydration. Then we moved to salting. Why would we suddenly be able to salt, the access to salt? Then we brought in sugaring, which is our most recent way to create that osmotic pressure and pull the water out. Sugaring is the latest one because it's an expensive one. Drying is easy, but it doesn't work for everything because some things are too thick and will rot before they can dry. Salting is very good for it, but then it changes the taste and flavor and quality of the food. Sugaring creates it like a candy, and that's a different kind of taste experience. But sugaring was something that would not have been used for food preservation until only about 400 years ago it started coming in. And then anyone think why sugar became a way to preserve food, and it is only a few hundred years old? What made the difference to make sugar a method of preserving food?
Maybe like global travel, because
Travel.
the sugar comes from sugarcane.
It does. You cannot have sugaring unless you can have large quantities of sugar. And that's actually a rare thing in the natural world. Honey is the classic example where we have a large quantities of sugar, and sugar is produced in the Caribbean. How did that happen? It didn't just happen in the Caribbean. It's not out of context. We bring the history, bring the politics in. What happened that allowed it? The slave trade. The slave trade transformed our cultures around the world. There was suddenly an access to cheap commodities, cotton, coffee, sugar. You had so much sugar, you could afford to use it as a preserving compound now. It radically altered us all around the world. Some of us benefited from it, some of us were harmed by it, and it shapes our culture. And if you're from the West Indies, sugar is still an important thing. This reverberates. All of us have a history that connects us. How do we think of chocolate as as Swiss when they have no chocolate trees there. No cocoa trees exist in Switzerland. There's a hit, the slave trade transforms this world right down to the food we eat. And it explodes all over, positive and negative. So you can talk about it. It could be a 2-minute conversation in the classroom that brings a cultural perspective in and brings some reflection on what we're looking at. Okay. And finally, the last one is what we call the fall back, spring forward, like the time clock technique to history in the science classroom. So if you were to check most textbooks on the history of the scientific method, the majority of sources on the history of the scientific method will mention Galileo Galilei, maybe Francis Bacon, a few other people, and they talk about the origins of the scientific method, and they say that they popularized it, is the most accurate description. Some of them say they actually invented it. That's wrong. But if we took a look at what actually happened with the scientific, we go before Galileo Galilei, we could go backwards in time and say, well, where did he get it from? And we can go forward in time and say, how does that change? We could bring a lot more pictures to it. A lot of people think that going for CRP means wiping out European culture from our classroom. It does not. The problem is that if we focus on only a part of the story, we could actually entrench ourselves into a single narrative that highlights a point in one culture's history. And we often do it in a science classroom where we focus on the story during the height of the European Enlightenment, for example. But the story goes back and it goes forward, and we get a lot more perspectives in when we do that. So if we go backwards, we could bring in, and I'm going to say his name wrong. I'm just going to go into my comments because I wrote his name and I'm going to pronounce it wrong, I'm sure. This gentleman in the picture here is Ibn al-Haytham, and I'm sure I said that wrong, so I apologize. He is known as the person with the first written record of the scientific method. He invented the first camera. His book of optics is exactly the book that Galileo Galilei used to develop his research methods. And he was very influential on a lot of the European scientists. So understanding what he did, and think about it, he never gets mentioned in our science classroom, despite the fact we have an entire optics unit, and his book is literally the book of optics that he does this in. He lays down how to use the scientific method. Now, it doesn't mean he invented it. Cultures before him may have used it, and people before him may have used it, but he definitely is the first scientist with a written record of using it and showing how to use this to examine principles of physics. And we can spring forward in time. This is one of my tweets. It was an article that is talking about how we are evolving our citation methods. It was from Nature Journal. They put out a news. I get a news bulletin from them in my mailbox every couple of days with articles, so for the general public to get an idea of what's going on in science. And this one is about how our citations are evolving to include Indigenous oral teachings. When we take information from Indigenous cultures in the past, we didn't give credit. We actually don't even have a system to adequately give credit as part of the problem. So this is now, they're like, how do you cite them? Not just say I had an interview with somebody. What does that citation look like to give proper credit to them? That's amazing. Look at that. That's a new step in the scientific method. And it's nice to see it. Like even today, we've got stuff happening. So by going backwards in time and forwards in time, we avoid centering our story on a single point in history that is highlighting one culture. So if we do that, take a little time and do one of these strategies, we could bring the CPR in every now and again. Some of the resources you can get, there's lots out there, but I will plug myself at this point in time. I do have a YouTube channel. It's a small channel, nothing amazing. It's me in using PowerPoint essentially, but we do have, I do have about 20 or so videos on it. This is the academic pathways playlist. It includes various strategies like the culturally responsive pedagogy, land-based indigenous, etc. It's got different strategies. Every video comes with a lesson. The lessons are primarily biology because I teach biology, so 11 and 12 biology, or grade 9. Whatever I'm teaching, and if I'm making a video, I take something that I just used to make into the video. So the trash fish, there are 3 videos I could recommend if you're looking for a lesson to go with it. There is the indigenous land pedagogy, where students were transforming using, it was based on biogeochemical cycles and the information they were using to transform our farming practices using a variety of techniques from indigenous cultures and even modern techniques like agroforestry, etc. And permaculture. There is the dual coding one that contains trophic cascades. So, how does one organism affect other organisms in the food chain? And there's one called MLN. It's really a grade 11 lesson, but if you didn't do the part, so it's a scenario where there's an invasive species in this fictitious land, and the wizard is going to tell them, I got a potion to take care of things. And you have to decide, should we trust taking this potion? And you're supposed to analyze it based on the food chain, make an evolutionary tree, and then finally a genetics question, and then make a decision on whether to use the potion or not. Grade 9s can't do the evolution bit or the genetics bit, but they could do the food chain analysis and make a decision based on that. So those lessons are there if you'd like. I will try to put out lessons from time to time. I do put out ideas on my Twitter, and I will put them out on my YouTube channel over time. And Leah, is this slide deck going to be available somehow through Steo?
I think so. And Amy was asking if it's okay to share the recording.
Oh, absolutely. Yes. And so I will probably put out, you know what, I'll put a tweet out in my Twitter feed with the trash fish file so that anyone can have that. Okay.
Yeah. So Amy says
There
she'll
we
be
go.
happy to post any materials.
All right. Wonderful, Amy. Thank you. All right. Does anyone have any questions or comments or anything? Oh, I see people have been asking.
Teresa's like, I just followed you. Nice. I guess I'm supposed to say the thank you to the end, but I feel compelled to say something now. Usha, I really enjoyed this presentation because it's so practical. Like I like the examples. I find them really intriguing. I think I have the same teachables as you, biology and chemistry. So these are all courses that I teach. So I'm really enjoying that.
Oh.
So if you have any questions, you can put them in the chat. Any questions from anybody? Any more comments?
Yes, I'm a big fan of simple examples. You know what, I know it's lovely to have the massive lesson plan. The truth is, teachers don't have time for that. We usually have 10 minutes to prep something. I'm a big fan of if you can show examples that are sustainable. If you're a new teacher, I know it's going to take you more than 10 minutes. It will. But an experienced teacher, if we are strategic in what we do and we're reflective in what we do, we could develop our lessons like these. 10 minutes prep is what it can do. Sometimes I'm doing it on the fly. I'm like, you know what? And I just Google images and I bring it up on a whiteboard. Okay, we're going to use this picture to talk about. And it's because I've heard about something in the news or something like that. We can just pull that out and use it. So. Yes, CRP shouldn't be an add-on. If you think you're diverting from your science curriculum to do the CRP, you're going to be resistant to doing it because firstly, I don't think it's effective, but more so you're going to be resistant to doing it because science has a very big curriculum already. We don't have time to go off on tangents, right? We need to stay on our curriculum. And yes, it's a habit that you develop over time. Don't think that any pedagogy that you do, if you could do it once or twice when you start with, and then as you do it, you're like, you know what, you come up with more ideas. That's usually how we do it. You don't have to be perfect at first. So if you say, look, once for the unit, I want to make sure I can say, yeah, I feel I did CRP. It's a good start. It'll become more and more over time. All right, student teacher, good luck. It's a good time to be a student teacher, actually. There are a lot of jobs coming up.
student teacher is graduating December 17th.
Oh, wow. They will be in a job by January.
Are there any other questions? Or if you have an example that's in your head, you can
Oh,
share
yes, if you have an
share that as
example you'd
well.
like to share, that's always a wonderful idea. Any ideas you've heard? No worries, it's been a pleasure.
We have a nice interactive crowd.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sparing your time. I know we're all so busy and we have families and we are exhausted at the end of a week. It's really fun to see that people come out.
Right, shall we sign off?
Yeah, I think
Okay, I'm gonna stop the recording. Is that okay? Shall I stop the recording?
yes, absolutely.